My name is Charles Harrell, and I work for the Veterans History Project. I'm here in Kaiser, West Virginia, with Mr. Harold Walters. Today is January 14th, 2006. Mr. Walters, for the record, would you state your full name?
Harrell Stephen Walters,
And what is your current address?
Route 4, Box 219, Kaiser, West Virginia, 26726.
Where were you born, Mr. Walters?
Davis, West Virginia,
And when?
February 9th, 1919.
What branch of service were you in?
U.S. Army Air Corps and in the Air Force.
Do you remember what company or wing or you were in?
I was in the training command for a couple of years as a navigation instructor. And then I went to radar school and became a radar operator, and I volunteered to go overseas with the B-29s. I trained in Clovis, New Mexico in B-29 training. And I went to my crew. We went to Saipan as a replacement crew for B-29s in the 497th group of the 73rd Bomb Wing. And after I was there for a few days, they sent me up to wing headquarters as a radar specialist. And I flew some combat missions, but my main position on Saipan was I had a radar training program for the radar operators that came from the States in an introduction to combat. And it was a radar school. I was in charge of that whole operation in wing headquarters.
When did you enlist?
May 29th, 1941.
And when did you finally get discharged from the military?
June the 3rd, 1951.
And you mentioned you were you went directly from as a cadet. You were a cadet.
I graduated I took my final examinations at college on Tuesday, left for the Air Corps on Wednesday. I was inducted at Fort Thomas, Kentucky on May the 29th, 1941. I went to pilot training at Muskogee, Oklahoma in PT-19s, and I washed out of pilot training.
So you wanted to be a pilot?
Yes. The draft, my draft number in Tucker County was 33, and I was a senior in college. And he said, "You can, we'll let you graduate this spring, but on June the 1st, you're 1A. Furthermore, the first 33 in this county, or first 26 in this county, are deferred because of dependents." I was 6 on the list. So at that time, America knew that sooner or later we're going to have to get into this conflict. And he sent some Air Corps representatives into the college to talk to us seniors. And since I was going to be drafted, my roommate and I volunteered. We took the physical exam in Lexington, Kentucky, and volunteered. And I got my orders to report to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps. And then they shipped me directly to Muskogee, Oklahoma, pilot training. I had, 20 hours or so flying, but my first solo flight, I only had about 4 hours flying time. The instructor turned me loose to solo. I had never seen an airplane hardly before I got to Muskogee. He turns me loose to solo. So I got in the plane and pushed the throttle, started down there, and I didn't have enough rudder and the plane turned sideways. I was headed across the field for 2 lines of airplanes there. And I hauled back on the throttle and ground looped the plane. But at that time then I was behind, really. They wanted people who could really fly right now. They were building up the training. But then when my last flight was with the first lieutenant, instructor for the U.S. Army Air Corps, and when I came down he said, well, I'm going to send you before the board. But I'd heard about the navigation program. It had been started at Pan American in Miami, Florida, that they were training some Army Air Corps navigators. And I heard that they were starting the navigation program in the Army. So I applied for that. I said, because I knew if I came back to Tucker County, I was going to be drafted. And I still wanted to be an officer. So they sent me to Turner Field, Albany, Georgia, in navigation school. And I graduated the day before Pearl Harbor in 1941.
I'd like to go back and talk about growing up. You said you were born in Davis,
West
Virginia. Can you tell me about your parents? What type of parents?
Well, my father was originally from Flintstone, Maryland. He only had about a 4th grade education.
What's his name?
He went to Davis to work in a tannery. And he worked himself up as foreman of the dry house. And we lived in the tannery house. It was a house right beside the tannery. And the supervisor of the tannery liked him real well. Wanted him to, when the tannery moved out, they wanted him to go with the tannery, but he had married my mother, who was born in Canaan Valley. And he didn't want to leave the area, so he went to coal mines and worked in the coal mines for 19 years. And but during the Depression, we were poor. But we never went hungry because we had picked berries in the field. We had a garden. We improvised, played ball.
What was your father's name?
Edward Cleveland Walters. Ed Walters.
He worked in the mines for 19 years. Did he
Yes.
ever get black lung?
No, he never got black lung. For some reason, he didn't get black lung.
Was he in the First War?
No. He married my mother in 1917, and I was born 2 years later. And when he was married, he was older. In fact, he was 32 years old when he got married. He was 34 when I was born. So he was older, and he was not inducted into World War I.
How about your mom? What's your mom like?
Pardon?
What was your mom like?
My mother was a country girl from Canaan Valley. Went to grade school, 1-room schools, and then she went to Davis and worked as she was a little older when she went to Davis, worked for a lawyer as a maid, and finished 8th grade in Davis grade school, and then met my father, and they married in 1917. In fact, the chair you're sitting in was the property of their marriage. It's antique. That table and chair set was what they started housekeeping with.
I'll try to be careful on this.
Yes.
In 1917, we were in the midst of the war. You said your parents were a little older than usual.
Yes.
What was the name of your mother? I didn't think you said.
Edward Cleveland Walters.
Yeah, that's your dad. How about your mama?
My mom was Oda Nell Cosner.
Had your mother already moved out of her house when she met your father, or was she still living with her parents?
No, she was still a maid for these people.
Oh, so she was living in somebody else's
Her family
house.
was still in Canaan Valley. And she worked as a telephone operator at one time when she was a young girl. Also as a waitress in a restaurant. And also for a maid for this lawyer.
Now, I know you weren't around at the time, but I was wondering if she told you, did she quit her job with the lawyer when she got married?
Yes.
And did she do anything else?
She was a full-time housewife.
Stayed home.
Yeah.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a brother. He was born in 1922. And when he was 12 years old, he got blood poisoning. They didn't have sulfa drugs then, but he got sick and he died when he was 12. I was 15 at the time. And he died, so I was raised as an only child.
That must have been devastating.
He and I were very close. Fact is, I was small for my age, and I played more with his friends than I did with guys of my own age. So, but he was healthier than I was, and we're not quite sure. They operated on him in the hospital in Elkins, and he got double ether pneumonia. They used ether in those days, and he passed away about 3 o'clock one morning. Yeah.
During the 1920s, you're less than 10 years old. Do you recall any of that time?
Oh, yes.
Was life better in the 20s than it was in the 30s, or could you not really tell?
No, it's about the same. One interesting thing that occurred in the 1920s, I played ball. I was a sports nut, but I was too small to play on a team. But I was mascot for a local baseball team. My father was from Flintstone. At that time, the New York Yankees farm club was Cumberland Colts. So my uncle, we didn't have a car. My uncle came from Flintstone up, got us, and took down to my grandmother's. And I got to see the all-time greats, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, all the all-time greats play ball. So I was a Yankee fan most of my life. That was one thing interesting.
As the 20s ended, the Great Depression started, and you said you never went hungry, but you didn't have much money either.
No. After my brother died, there was a racy store, old-time store, general merchandise store. And the father, John Racy, died, and his son inherited the store. And I got a job. All through high school, I worked in this store. My top pay was $3 a week. But I earned enough money. I went to Berea College with $50 in my pocket. I got a college education. Berea College is a very unique school.
Tell me where Berea College is.
It's about 40 miles south of Lexington, Kentucky.
Had you ever traveled that far away before?
No. When I left Davis on a bus out of Red House, Maryland, and went to Berea, I thought I had never been away from home. But in Berea, it was just like living at home, really. We couldn't leave the campus. We lived in a dormitory. And I worked for the Dean of Labor there, and he promised me if you keep your grades up, you won't have to worry about money. Many times I went to wondered how I was going to pay my term bill, but he would have a scholarship in that.
So your dad
I
didn't
stayed
really
there
have
in
the money.
summers. I stayed in the summers, and I worked all through college.
Your dad didn't really have the money to afford college for you.
No. He was out of work then. Later, he worked for the mortician in Davis, mowing the grass in the cemetery. And then, of course, when he was 65, he started drawing small Social Security check. And he just did odd jobs after they got out of the mines.
When did you graduate high school?
Graduated in 1937. My wife, I graduated together, and she was valedictorian, I was salutatorian.
So you knew each other.
I still say that's still the way it is. So,
what school?
I will say this is personal. I was married during the service, but we split when I got out of the Air Force, and so she went to California with the children, and I have 3 children on the West Coast. But I went home and married my high school sweetheart. And we've been married 52 years now.
As you graduated high school, topping your class, why were you so smart? I mean, was academics something that you excelled in?
Oh, yeah. My father only went to the 4th grade. And he said I hit the teacher with a poker in the 4th grade. I jumped out the window and I went back to school. He always regretted that. He said, he took me in the mines twice. He said, I took you in there to show you the seam of coal, big seam of coal, number 1. Number 2, get yourself an education. So that was my stimulus.
So there was no doubt in your mind what you were going to do?
I was going to go to college some way. I didn't know how, but I was going.
While you were in high school and middle school, during your school days, did you have any real close friends that you associated with?
There was a boy who lived right across the alley. A fellow by the name of Harrell. He lost his mother, and he had a baby sister, and he kept, his father worked in the mines, and he cooked and took care of, he and I were very, when my brother died, we were almost like brothers. We were poor, very poor, but he was quite an athlete. He was an all-state basketball player from Davis High School. But in those days, we didn't have school books provided for us. And English teacher would have sign Sinclair Lewis's book, or some of these classics. We had to scribe and find one. So we would find a book somewhere. Somebody would, his neighbor or somebody would have one. So I would study at night the book, and then about 11 o'clock I'd take it across the alley and put it in front of the door. He would get up and get his mother off to work, and then he would study the book.
So you were sharing books?
Oh yeah, we were very close friends, very close.
Did you have any pets as a kid?
No. Well, I had a rabbit one time. That's about all. No, my father didn't believe in having pets in a town. Said, now if we lived on a farm, have a dog or something as a pet, that would be fine, but not in a town. He didn't particularly care for that.
Did you always grow up in the same same house in the same town, or did you move?
After the tannery house, we lived by the tannery. When the tannery moved out, of course, they sold the house. And my father bought a house just a block away. I found the statement after he died, $750 for house and lot in Davis, and that's where I grew up, in that house. He was very severe. I didn't have any problem with. He was a disciplinarian. I didn't have any trouble with discipline in the service. He drove a mule in the mines. It was horse mines. Brought the coal out. And he had a 6-foot rawhide whip. And I felt the lashes of that a few times. So discipline was no problem for me.
Were you all a church-going family much?
Oh, yes. I went to Sunday school when I was 2 years old, started Sunday school. And then when I got older, I taught a Sunday school class. And I had to be in church with my father. An interesting little experience. One Sunday, my cousin and other boys, I was sitting down front. We're kind of cutting up. The preacher stopped. "You boys speak good down there." From then on, I didn't sit down there. I sat with my father in there. So, yeah, I grew up as a Methodist and then met my wife. She's Lutheran. And I became a Lutheran, but in addition to a lot of things, I was a lay assistant to the bishop. We worked in the Lutheran church in Davis. We kept the doors of that church open 9 years without a pastor. I was in the pulpit maybe 4 times.
You mentioned that you were sweethearts with your wife when you were in high school.
Yeah, well, no, she was my first date. But then when I came back, she had had an unfortunate experience too. She had 3 children, so we got married. I adopted the children. They've accepted me as a father. We've gotten along real well.
As high school students, did you compete to see who got better grades, or was it really?
What?
Did you compete about grades?
Oh yeah, we competed. Fact is, I'd go home and tell my mother, "Hey, oh boy, I had a good day today. I answered a question Edith Forsythe couldn't answer." So,
how long did your mother and father live?
my father was 72 when he died, and my mother he died in 1958. My mother was much younger. She was only 21 and he was 32 when they got married. And she died at 76.
So they were around when you came back from the service?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the reason I stayed in Tucker County. I had my degree, but when I came back, I worked in a filling station for a while, a couple of years, but I got fed up, so I got these education courses and I started teaching school. And
when you went off to Brea College, I know it's hard to tell what your parents felt, but did they want you to go?
My father would rather for me to go to a business school. The fact is, if I hadn't gotten to Brea, I don't know how he would have done it, but he would have got me into Mountain State Business College in Parkersburg, I think. That's really what he wanted me to do. But I was set on college education.
But way out there in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Were you homesick in it?
No. Well, first semester I was not this lady here, but a girl I was going with. But went home Christmas holidays and wasn't the same, so I didn't want it. I stayed in Brea all 4 years. In the summer I took a week off for Christmas, that's all.
Did you have any college buddies that you really became friends with?
Yes, my roommate was a boy by the name of Sutton. Earl Sutton from Crab Orchard, Kentucky. He came to Berea, the most dilapidated suitcase you ever saw. He had a suit on that he graduated. He had about 2 or 3 pairs of underwear and a couple pairs of socks. That's all. And we roomed together for years. We went to the Air Corps together. We joined the Air Corps together, went to Muskogee, but he washed out real quick. I'll never forget when he came down. We were in the same flight. The instructor was a little Italian instructor. Boy, he chewed us out. But I remember the day he came down, I met the plane, he was white. The instructor chewed him, said, "You're through. You're washed out." So he came back to Kentucky, and but then he joined again. He was a navigator. He was in a he was wounded in a B-17. He became a navigator. But I met him later. I heard he was to Peyote, Texas. I was stationed in Monroe, Louisiana, and I got a pilot to fly me out there, and I got to see him. And then we went to a Berea reunion together, not so many years. He died a couple of years ago.
Here we are in the middle of the Great Depression, 1937. You've just graduated. You know you want to go to college, but there's not the money. You found the money, I know.
Well,
did you ever consider any of the programs that FDR had out to try to help the Great Depression, like the WPA or the CCC?
They had these classes of Spanish there in Davis. I never took any. No, I didn't consider that. I wanted to go to college, and that was my goal. And Berea was my only hope as far as college education concerned. I said I had $50 I saved him. I worked in this store. The fellow I worked for was a tremendous guy. He taught me a lot of things.
At the store?
Yeah. Taught me how to drive. I learned to drive with a 1929 Dodge truck. And he taught me to drive. And he wasn't married at the time. Saturday night, we worked Saturdays from 8 till 9 o'clock at night. He'd close the store and take me to the movies, and that was a big treat. Take me to the movie.
So you got out there and you went through your education. What did you major in college?
Chemistry. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I took a chemistry course under a Prof. Capps, and he was tremendous. That guy was a tremendous professor. In fact, there's a man by the name of Finn, I think is his name, Nobel Prize winner, went to school under him. So I majored in chemistry and got a major in mathematics and minor in physics. And I had a scholarship. In fact, when I went to the draft board, came back senior year at Christmas time, went to draft board, I said, "Look, I've got a scholarship to study chemistry at the University of Wisconsin. How about that?" I got the card. June the 2nd, 1A. Furthermore, the first 26 in this county deferred because of dependence. So I was 6 on the list. So $33 a day once a month didn't appeal to me. I had a college education. I was trying to be an officer. So that's when I joined the Air Corps.
Where did you go to join the Air Corps, to sign the papers and so on?
Oh, I went to Fort Thomas, Kentucky.
They sent you there to be inducted?
I got orders for Berea. I took my final exams on Tuesday, and 2 years before I ever saw my diploma. they sent the diploma home in absentia.
How did it feel that very first day of being in the military when there's no war?
Oh, whew. In those days, they tried the cadet corps. They tried to make officers out of us like West Point in a short period of time. You talk about hazing. Today, they wouldn't get away with this. Back you up into a corner, make you stiff a bit, stand there, you know. They didn't beat you or anything, wasn't that. But the hazing was tremendous out there. They wanted me to say, but I didn't have any trouble with that stuff. My father trained me pretty good. If they told me to stand in a brace where I get so many wrinkles in there, I tried. That. Or eat a square meal. Did you ever eat a square meal? Sit at a table like this with your feet on the floor. Pick up the fork. Oh, you fly the beam at the same time, but try to pick peas up like that. Go away hungry, really. But that's some of the things we did. Walked on that base out there in Muskogee. The upperclassmen had just been open post. For the first 6 weeks, you didn't get open post. You were stuck there in the base. These guys had just gotten out. And we got there the day before we were supposed to. And walked in there, walked in the gate. These cadets came down. Well, welcome to the country club. Where's your golf clubs? All of a sudden, they dropped those suitcases. You grabbed them, and they marched in there. And for 2 days, they worked us over.
Were you physically capable of doing everything?
Oh, yeah. As far as my physics, when I passed the physical exam at Lexington, Kentucky, I didn't have any problem with that.
Was there much running involved?
And much what?
Running?
Running. Yeah, we had to run, let's see, it was 30 yards. We had to run it 5 times at certain 40 sub-seconds or something like that. Those kinds of things.
How about weapons training?
We didn't get any weapons training until I became an officer. And then they took you down the range and with that 45, and I have yet to hit the target. We carried a 45 on our missions in combat. But I don't know whether they would shoot or not.
You said you washed out of pilot training.
Yes.
Were you concerned about not being an officer when that happened?
I was concerned, what am I going to do? If I go back to Tucker County, I'm going to be drafted. What's going to happen? So I'd heard about this navigation program, and evidently I'd made some kind of an impression. They must have my school records and so forth. I know in primary training we had to take these ground school engines, and they had a math course. They had 1/2, 3/4, and so forth, that kind of stuff. And I was exempted from that because I had a major in mathematics. And to get into navigation school, they were supposed to take a math test. It was 10 problems. Same thing, was no problem.
So there was no doubt that you were going to go become a navigator. Was this all before Pearl Harbor happened?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. This, I said this was in the summer of 1941.
Did you know war was coming?
No. Fact is, graduated on Saturday. At that time, it wasn't set up to cadets were not commissioned on graduation. Navigators, like the pilots were. They graduated, they got second lieutenant bars. We were still cadets, but they gave us a 7-day pass. So I took off from Turner Field, Albany, Georgia, on a bus, coming to West Virginia on a 7-day pass. I stopped in Kentucky to see a girl, and we were sitting Sunday afternoon. I heard Pearl Harbor bombed. Where's Pearl Harbor? But I got on the bus. I had civilian clothes on then. Got on the bus, went to Cincinnati, and caught a bus for Red House, Maryland, up here on Route 50. And I got home, of course, there was a telegram. And next morning I caught a bus back. But I didn't get back on the base until about Thursday. Traveled on buses all the way back to Georgia. I walked in, the guy says, "Boy, they're looking for you." I went in, reporting as ordered, "Sir." "Where have you been?" "I returned on the first available transportation, sir, when I got your telegram." "Where do you live?" "West Virginia." "Oh, that accounts for it." But they made us instructors, cadet instructors. My roommate there didn't want to be an instructor. They sent 5 of my class out, but they kept the rest of us that had a college degree and so forth as navigation instructors.
But still not an officer.
No. Until January the 8th of 1942. It was about 3 weeks or so. We were still cadets. But it was interesting. 41.5, I was in 41.5. 41.6 graduated. They were still cadets. 42.1. It's interesting. 42.1 had a boy by the name of Wetzel, who had been the cadet commander at Muskogee, where I was before. He came through navigation school. And his father was a general. Well, we were sitting in the barracks, and we looked up, here's this general coming down the hall. And he says, "Where's Lieutenant Wetzel?" Down there. Hadn't commissioned. The commanding officer of the base was Colonel Patrick. I'll bet you he got chewed out. Because the next day, 41.5 was commissioned. Next day, 41.6 was commissioned. And the next day, 42A was commissioned. Commissioned second lieutenants, boy. They must have been over there. And we should have been commissioned before. But we were still cadets for that period of time.
When you became a navigation instructor, is that what you became? Where did they send you?
Stayed there.
Stayed in
Turner Field. And then it was an advanced pilot training base. And they started this navigation school. But after a year there, they opened up a school just strictly for navigators at Monroe, Louisiana.
Is that where you went?
That's where I went. Selman Field, S-E-L-M-A-N, Selman Field in Monroe, Louisiana.
I have interviewed another navigator.
Pardon?
I have interviewed a navigator, and I was trying to make a connection here.
Well, the first bases were Turner Field, Kelly Field, and Mather. Were the first 3 bases that they opened up for navigation traders. In fact, our class, in my opinion, I would have to check this, but I'm pretty sure, we are among the first 300 aerial navigators ever trained by the U.S. Army Air Corps.
How was the training to learn navigation? Was it easy
good.
enough?
Of course, it was, compared to today, it was antique. The bubble sextant for astronomy, for night navigation, dead reckoning, pilotage. But I must have made some kind of impression on them there, because I flew a radius of action mission as a student. And it so happened that the pilot that day was a lieutenant colonel, which is kind of unheard of. And the co-pilot was not an instructor. He was another pilot. And I was the lead navigator. We flew in AT-7s, and the three navigators. One did pilotage, one did three different things. But I was in charge of the plane that day on the mission radius of action mission.
What is that?
Radius of action. You fly out so far, given a certain amount of time, and come back, conserving gasoline, and you plan the mission so that you're limited to the time, so far and back on schedule. It's just like Saipan, we had to fly 3,000 miles round trip, B-29s with 6,000 gallons of gasoline. You had to be very careful with the efficiency of the engine and so forth. So that particular day I flew this radius of action, and I told it so far, and then I gave him a heading back to Turner Field. We used a bridge across the river as an IP, and when my ETA ran out, the pilot said, "Look through your drift meter." And there was that bridge straight down, right at that. I think that went around the base like crazy.
Right on target, huh?
Yeah. Also, I don't know what it was, but after I went back, I went home after Pearl Harbor, they sent a bunch of us down and gave us an IQ test. And I must have done pretty well with that. I must have done pretty well on the IQ test because my efficiency reports must have been pretty good, because in 6 months I became a first lieutenant. In fact, that's kind of bad in a way, because there were several guys been there quite a while before I was. Instructors were still second lieutenants. Here I was promoted to first lieutenant. That doesn't sit too well with your peers sometimes, you know. But my promotion came through.
As an instructor there, you were getting students in all the time.
I was a flying instructor. They put me down on a flight line, and I flew as co-pilot. The pilot, you fly in the co-pilot seat, and you were instructed, checking the three students in the plane, what they were doing. Then when they came back, you checked their logs and grade them.
Were you certified to fly also as a pilot?
No. Pilots let us handle planes some. One night was flying when I remember this, coming back from Texas. We went by Barksdale Field, and went by. I looked out. Pilot was asleep. He took a nap, and I was watching the instruments. It was on automatic pilot. So I saw a light. It looked like there was a plane right there, man, coming at me. And I hit that wheel like that. He woke up in a hurry. He said, "That's all right, Bucky. By the way, I got the name Bucky Walters." There's guys in the Air Force that didn't know my right name. When there was a pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds, Bucky Walters and Paul Derringer, that pitched the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series one year. So I started throwing the softball some. One day I was pitching, and the guy said, "Hey, there's Bucky Walters." That name stuck. I never had a nickname till then, that time. So I left Selman Field in early in 1944.
Now we've just gone through about 2.5 years of
Yeah.
war, and you're instructing this entire time.
Instructing, right.
Was there any time that you feared that you were going to be sent to the front line?
No, we were frozen. We were frozen in our positions. However, I volunteered to get out of there. I got disgusted. I was sitting in my office one day, and they had started what they called an air inspector's office. And this guy came in, first lieutenant, I was a captain, came in, pulled my filing out and said, "Hey, you've got tech order 41-52 out of place here. I've got to write you up." I said, "You mean to say that paper out of place there is going to make a difference in this war? I got buddies in England, the 8th Air Force are getting killed." I said, "Next time there's a class out of here, get me out of here." That's what made me mad. So what they would do, the class would graduate, and if there was a kid in the class that was pretty sharp, they'd keep him as instructor and send you out. That's how I got out, training command.
You mentioned that you had people that you had known that were with the 8th Air Force or 15th Air Force, whatever Air Force. Did any of your students keep in touch with you?
No.
About what they were doing?
In fact, I belong to the navigation organization now, and I don't see too many guys. I've contacted several. I want to go to a reunion. I get a newsletter.
I mean, during the war, did they ever call or write you a letter saying, "I'm here in England now"? Or did you ever get close enough to any of them as friends?
No. No. Never did.
After 2.5 years of war, you're tired of instructing and you volunteer.
Yeah, I said, "Get me out of here." There are guys that are. So they sent me to radar school at Boca Raton, Florida, and APQ 13 radar training a few weeks. And then they sent me to Clovis, New Mexico for B-29 training.
Before we talk about the radar, had navigation changed any from the time that you began instructing versus the time in 1944?
No. The only change was when we got in combat, we had Loran set. And Loran was like out in Saipan, they had 3 stations. It's tri-mit stuff. We could take fixes with that Loran set off the coast of Japan that were more accurate than trying to take celestial, shoot the stars, three-star fixes, which we had learned pretty well. Fact is, what made it nice for navigation was I had 2 courses of astronomy in college, and night flying was. Fact is, I taught some instructors the stars, and celestial navigation was with that bubble section that was snap. That's where I got my reputation. So,
when you taught navigation, were you always flying in the same type of plane?
No, we had AT-7s or C-45s, Beechcrafts, twin engines, and we had some C-60s that we flew, but that was the planes we used mostly.
Had you ever gone up into a 4-engine bomber like a B-17 or 24?
Oh, after I went into 29s, I came back, went back out Bikini Atoll, or Kwajalein for the Bikini Atom Bomb test. I was always volunteer. When we came back from overseas in October of 1945, we reformed our group. 73rd Wing reformed at MacDill Field, Florida. So went down there. Well, we were supposed to go. Was supposed to be in some kind of training down there, but they dissolved the 73rd Wing. And the morning that we got orders that we didn't know what was going to happen, 2 pilots, 2 majors came in and said they needed a navigator and a radar operator for spatial mission. Okay, here we go. Packed a bag, jumped in the plane right then on the spot. Took off for Washington, D.C. They gave us a Q clearance. We didn't know it at the time, but it was the atom bomb tests in Bikini Atoll, and General Power was our pilot. And the crew was, we had a radio mechanic, radio operator. I was a radar mechanic and radar operator. I didn't know much about the mechanics, but I could operate that set. And so we got a Q clearance for top secret stuff. And FBI went into my hometown up at Davis and asked questions around. Word kind of got around that I was being investigated, about scared my mother to death. She heard about this. She thought I was in real trouble, but they couldn't tell what we were doing at that particular time.
Well, you said in 1944 you volunteered to go to radar school.
Yes.
When you got to radar school, had you even known what radar was?
No.
Was it difficult to pick up and understand?
Operation of it. The operation wasn't. We flew missions out over. If I had known about the Bermuda Triangle at that time, I'm not so sure I'd like that. But we flew missions and operated the set down there. Got cleared for another number rating, navigator, radar operator. And then when I was out at Clovis, I did a little with the Norden bomb sight, learned a little bit about that. So actually it was triple rated.
I was talking once to a radar operator that was on a ship in Okinawa, and he said that he wasn't allowed to talk about it at all.
On Saipan, we weren't permitted to talk about radar. But all of a sudden, Life magazine came out with radar photos. It was a screwy thing.
Tell me, how did you end up going to Saipan?
Well, Clovis, New Mexico, I was in B-29 training, was on a crew, navigation crew, and they sent us over on a C-54 as a replacement crew. They were getting shot up bad out there. They were losing crews like crazy. We moved into a barracks when we landed out there where 3 crews had just been shot down the day before.
I thought B-29s were high flyers, so high that the Japs couldn't get them.
Oh, 30,000 feet, those 30,000 feet, all right, but those Zeros came up there. And in fact, those Japanese backed off and start to roll, open up their guns. If they rammed you, it was great. They were for the great emperor.
Tell me, what's your first impression of Saipan when you arrived?
Oh, I didn't think much of it. They still had, they went in there in November of 44. Isley Field was built in 1944. In fact, a friend of mine, Tom O'Connor, here, was in the engineers of the Marine Corps, helped build Isley Field that we flew off of. And but there were still air raid signals when we got there. The Japanese were still flying down from Iwo bombing Saipan. In fact, they blew up several B-29s when we first got there.
Do you remember when you got there? What day?
It was about January the 3rd, 1945.
Did you see any of these air raids or hear
No.
them?
By the time we got there, they had quit.
I want to discuss the security that that there was on Saipan. Were there any Japanese left hiding anywhere?
Oh my, there were about 5,000 Japanese up in the mountains that were still there. Fact is, one night there were a couple of pilots, a couple of nurses went down on the beach and got killed. Japanese sneaked in. But the Marines ran patrols up there, and they had signs, "Beware of Japanese." And there were a couple of prisoners in our outfit. They worked them, they cut grass or something. But I did a stupid thing one night. Right after they quit shooting, when the war was over, November the 15th, 1945. August 15th, 1945. Some of the boys in our outfit was anxious to get back home. Instead of waiting for the unit to move back, they got orders to catch a boat up at the north end of the island. And I had a friend, and I forgot what his name was now. I said, "Bucky, how about I was in wing headquarters, getting a jeep and take me up there. I got orders, catch a boat." So I got checked out a jeep, and I took him up there. And coming back, it was kind of a moonlight night, because in this jeep by myself down there, and I didn't have my gun, nothing. I saw the sign, "Beware of Japanese." I said, "Oh my gosh, those guys don't know the war's over." I floorboarded that jeep, got back all right. But I thought, man, that's I was really stupid. I could have been, those guys could have come out of the hills and got me. I was by myself.
You said you arrived as a replacement crew. Were you just with a crew that had been training together?
Yeah.
I want to pause the tape here. Do you remember the name of that crew?
I remember the pilot was Captain Fox. The bombardier was a young boy, about 19 years old, Bill Stoller from New York. The reason I remember him is I stayed in the Air Force for 10 years. And after I'd gone to Greenland in a photographic mission, they sent me to Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute, New York, to study polymer chemistry for a year and a half. And Bill Stoller was a cop. I called him. I got to see him later. But I don't remember much of the cruise. Because so when I got there, they took me off the crew. I got them another navigator. And they sent me up to wing headquarters, to radar. Intelligence, really, is what it was.
What were you doing there?
I as I said, they started this radar training for crews, combat crews coming overseas. And I was in charge of the school.
So you went one school to another school now on Saipan?
Yeah, I was a trainer. I was an instructor for, but every now and then I would fly combat, like I flew some of the fire raids on Japan. And every week these crews that would come up there to test their radar bombing, one day their crew would have to take their plane loaded with 500-pound bombs. And there was what was the name of that island, just north of Saipan. And we'd go up there, and they would have to bomb that by radar. It was, it still was one of these islands where still some Japanese on it, but they had bypassed them. They were there. But we used that island to practice radar bombing and to take pictures to see how accurate these guys were with the radar on the bombing set. So I flew once a week. I flew every day, or once a week with that crew, with a crew up to that mission. Pagan.
Did you want to fly combat missions at that time?
Oh, in fact, I was getting tired of that. Every 5 days a week, being in that classroom, and I was getting kind of tired. And I was about to request permission to go on a crew somewhere and fly combat. General O'Donnell, Rosie O'Donnell, was commanding general, and I argued with the radar specialist there and the wing navigator. They had a procedure for radar operators. The navigator was responsible for dropping the bombs. He had a scope up there. The operator back there, all he did was run it. But these guys came from the states where radar bombardiers. And I wanted that changed. And I argued it with them. Oh, no. So one day, the 73rd Wing wasn't doing too well after LeMay had started the night bombings on Tokyo, Osaka. I was on the Osaka mission that night. First night we caught Tokyo, we burned 16 square miles right out of the heart of the city. We dropped the altitude from 30,000 feet down to 7,000. And that night, when we were in the briefing room, they said, altitude tonight, 7,000 feet, you could drop, heard a pin drop, getting shot up like crazy up high altitude. Here we were. But we caught them with a 60-mile-an-hour surface wind, and we burned 16 square miles of that city. And then we hit...
was that your very first major combat flight?
My first major combat flight was, well, I flew one mission to an island to test the radar out. It was up above Iwo Jima. It's just before the invasion of Iwo Jima. In fact, the Navy was on the water. And going back, I had that fleet on my radar scope. And I called the pilot. I said, hey, you better get out of here. If you don't have your IFF on, we get shot out of here by our own Navy. We weren't supposed to be near it. Boy, he got out of there in a hurry. But I flew that mission, and then I flew a Osaka mission, one of the fire rays. Then I flew a mission up Toyama later, burned 99% of that city down in Toyama. And but those night raids were weird.
What was so weird about it?
Oh, you went in at 1 minute apart, put 400 B-29s going in over city, one plane apart, with 10 tons of incendiaries on board, and you get pretty good fire going. Well, that night we were back a ways. Buddies had gone up and started the fires pretty good. So my radar scope, you come in the IP and you go in, had a circle on there, and you change the circle whenever it got certain points. You toggled out 10 tons of bombs on the city. So when we got there, this fires had started pretty good. So when we hit this, and I toggled those out, we went 3,000 feet straight up.
The airplane just...
Yeah, I jumped down the seat, had flak suit on, and then we fell 3,000 feet. And I was with my old pilot that night, Captain Fox, the one I trained with. And I hit the floor. I finally got back in my seat, and I heard him say, "We still got 4 turning. Let's get out of here." But they were weird. You could smell the smoke in those raids. But LeMay had dropped leaflets on those cities and told the people, "Get out. We're going to burn you down." He justified this by the fact that there were home industries. They were doing war industries in their homes. And that's how we justified the fire rates.
Was LeMay on the island at the same time you were?
No, he was on Guam.
On Guam.
Headquarters. He was commanding general on Guam. We flew down there one day. I met him down there. I met him again at Quadsland. He flew in our plane, the command aircraft, the day that the air explosion on those ships at Bikini Atoll. He was in a plane. He wanted that whole fleet to sink. The bombardier missed the target by 1,500 feet. Boy, was he. We landed back at Quads. Newspaper reporters rushed up and said, "How was it, General?" No comment. But he chomped on that cigar. He was mad. That poor bombardier, Major Woods, was on the carpet 3 days trying to figure out how he missed the target.
Tell me about when you got to Saipan, how many airplanes did you see when you looked at the field? Were there hundreds or?
Oh, yeah. There were 300-400 B-29s.
That's a big airplane.
Oh, my.
Pretty new, too.
Oh, yeah. It was, fact is, it was a experimental airplane, really. It was having a lot of trouble with the engines, catching on fire. They had a lot of trouble with the 29s at first.
Did you have any problems on any one that you were on?
No. Well, coming back from Quads, that after the Bikini Atom Bomb test, about 500 miles off the coast, there was an engine going to catch on fire out there, and had to feather it. We had general power on board. I bet you the whole West Coast was alerted with air sea rescue. We got into Mather Field all right. It had blown a stack, and we landed, and we had a mechanic on board that could pull a 100-hour inspection. General says, "Can you get that fixed?" "Yeah." "A couple hours?" "Okay, we'll take off for Washington." So off we go, Washington.
When you were on Saipan and when the war was still going on, did your airplane ever get hit by any flak or German attack?
No,
Japanese attack?
I was never in a plane that got hit. No. I was very fortunate.
You saw those fire bombings, and obviously you knew you were killing lots of folk. How did that make you feel at the time?
Not good, but I depend on my makers. I didn't ask to be there. Furthermore, we didn't start the war. And as I said, we dropped leaflets, told those people we're gonna get you. And so how many people I killed when I toggled those bombs out, I don't know. But it doesn't worry me because, as I said, I have to depend on my maker.
In May of 1945, the war ends in Europe, not in Japan, I know. What happened on Saipan when the war in Europe was over? Was there any celebrations or
No,
what?
not very much. Well, the night that we got the word that Japan had surrendered, they had to take up all the 45s. All right, it was a celebration. They were shooting the 45s, and so forth. Yeah.
Were you on Saipan when the Enola Gay was there?
And what?
When the Enola Gay was on Saipan?
Oh yeah, on Tinian.
Tinian?
On next island. Oh yeah. Fact is, I met Tebbets and Farabee at Kwajalein on the atom bomb test of 46. I roomed right across the hall from them. And a lot of people said that they regretted what they had done, but they didn't. They didn't. And anytime I hear somebody criticize Harry Truman for authorizing the dropping of that, because in my opinion, I've said this many times, I was a speaker at American Legion Veterans Day program. Anytime I hear Truman criticized for this, it makes me upset, because in my opinion, that the Japanese had to save face. Now they've got something that they can't handle. They can quit the war. And so they gave up. In my opinion, that did it. And there's an awful lot of guys sitting in that room when I mentioned this that were on their way to the Pacific for the invasion. And if there'd have been I've been reading a lot of this recently. If there'd have been invasion, been the bloodiest battle the world had ever known. Because, for example, they had trained 3,000 and some pilots for just one mission, suicide mission, for the invasion, waiting.
On your flights over Japan, did you ever see any Japanese resistance?
No, but right after the war was over, we flew some mercy missions. We loaded up barrels of chocolate and medicine and stuff in barrels, put parachutes on them. We flew up to Tokyo to a prison camp where American prisoners were. I flew one of those missions. We flew up and down the streets of Tokyo. Boy, that was a mess. We had bombed it. But when we backed off, we found the camp. The guys had found some paint or something, and they had written on top of the roof, "Thanks," big white letters. And right across was a river from this train station. I don't know how many people were there. When we backed off, flopped those Bombay doors open to drop the supplies into that camp, man, those people took off. But there were people down the street down in Tokyo going like this. All right.
The war ends. You had no clue what the atomic bomb was at that time. Top secret?
I knew there was something. I had a friend in Berea that got a job as a chemist. We majored in chemistry together. He got a job at Carbide and Carbon in Charleston. And when the war started, they sent him down to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I visited him one time. He had to come to the gate, get me in. Security was pretty tight. But he couldn't say what he was doing. In fact, a lot of people down there didn't know really what they were doing. And security was really tight. And my opinion, a lot of people say we should have shown them what the tests were first. Truman, it was inhumane. Well, we had killed thousands of people with fire bombings. The radiation, that, in my opinion, the Bikini atom bomb tests was supposed to be for the ships, what effect this would have on ships. The Navy and the Air Force were fighting, battling things out at that time. And but it was, in my opinion, was an experiment. We knew very little about radiation, and they did have some live animals on those ships, and see the effect of radiation. And an awful lot of those ships were radioactive for quite a long time. That underwater shot trapped all that stuff. In fact, it hasn't been too long ago, read where the coconuts are still radioactive on Bikini.
The war ends. Do you have any desire to get out of the military?
Yes. I came home on, 40 days TDY, temporary duty rest and recuperation, or I came back to Davis. And I had a degree in chemistry. I had a family, and I was a captain at that time, and which was pretty fair salary. And I went down to Cumberland to Celanese plant, applied for a job as a chemist, and knew some people down there, and but they said they couldn't hire me because they had to take back the people that had been drafted. They had priority. They didn't know how many was coming back, so I didn't know what to do, so I decided to stay in a while. I justified that, sir. I have strange ideas sometimes, I guess, that maybe I'm helping the country if I stay in, you know. We have to remain strong. I believe in the military. Because after World War I sat at the feet of some World War I veterans. Never fight on foreign soil again. Isolation. Isolationists. We were so weak that when Hitler made his move, there was nothing we could do about it. We don't want to let that happen ever again. He got his start over there. We couldn't stop him. We didn't have anything.
After the war was over, did you ever fly to Japan and actually land and walk around?
No, I never went to Japan. I was back out. After the war was over, as I said, I was volunteered. Went back out to quads on the atom bomb test. Came back from that, and they needed a navigator for a B-17 to a photographic mission in Greenland. So I was a navigator on that, strictly navigator on that mission.
That's a seriously different size machine that you're flying.
Oh yeah, but they had radar on there too. I did the radar too, navigator. But we were stationed at BW-1 on Greenland, and it's about 20 miles up this fjord. You had to let down over the Atlantic Ocean and fly up this fjord around like this, go around a turn, 3 fingers of rock, pilot drop flaps and wheels, and you land. You don't go around. You're in this box, big iceberg coming down, so forth. So I was stationed up there for quite a while running photographs. At that time they were looking for a base up in the Greenland area. They ended up at Thule. But we photographed all of Greenland from the southern tip all the way up to the Arctic Circle. Tri-met stuff. Fly across, and then had pattern navigators are lined this up.
And that was your job?
That was my job on that.
How long did you stay there? A couple of years?
No, in Greenland I was only up there about 6 months.
6 months. After that,
That's a big hunk of ice.
After that, where did you go?
Then I came back, and at that time they were sending guys to school. So I applied for a school, and they sent me to Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute in New York to study polymer chemistry for a year and a half. So my records must have been pretty good. Fact is, I was integrated into the regular Air Force. the Air Force became a separate,
Separate branch in 47, right?
in 1947. And I applied for a regular commission. My commission was in reserve. And I applied for regular commission. This when I was down in Florida, McDill Field. They found a spot on my lung. I passed everything, the board and everything, but they found that they said you can't get a regular Air Force commission. Well, when I got with General Powers' crew, I could fly. I went to the Pentagon and I asked some guy in the Surgeon General's office. I said, I don't understand this. I could fly, be on active duty, but I can't get a regular Air Force commission. How come? Well, he got out the books, fine print here, so this is what it is. So when I got back from Quads, General Powers said, come to my office. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I had applied for a regular commission. He said, come to my office. So I went to his office. He got on the phone. He called Bowling Field. Man, there was a staff car there right now. Went over there. They took x-rays. About 3 weeks I had that commission. So that's when they sent me up to New York. Yeah. But after that, they sent me to radar, sent me to Biloxi, Mississippi. It was my last assignment, a radiological defense school. I was instructor of radiological defense school.
What was that supposed to do?
Oh, I guess I could tell you now. It was top secret stuff. We were training these guys that were monitoring Russia. Radiological defense use these instruments, go over there to Austria, right on the boundaries of Russia, to pick up any atomic explosions they had. It's equipment. And we used counters. We used radioactive materials to photographic film exposures.
Did you fly any of those missions?
No.
But you were teaching about them all.
Pardon?
Were you teaching about them all?
Teaching radiological, teaching some of the course. We had Navy and Army and Air Force people in the classes down there, Radiological Defense School. It was top secret at that time, what we were doing. We set up in a hangar down there at Keesler Field, big fans that blew air through these filters, pick up any debris, and then we take them in and monitor them with counters to see if there are any radioactive material in the air. And that's what they would do over in, pick up the air on these filters and monitor them to see what Russia was doing as far as atomic energy was concerned. Yeah, I was involved with that for a while.
When the 1950s roll around and Korea starts to get hot,
I would not have volunteered for Korea.
you volunteering every other time. That's what I was wondering.
I would not volunteer for that. If I'd have got orders, that's different. I wouldn't have been a guy that run to Canada or something. No way. I was a regular. I got my regular commission. I would have gone to Korea, but my old commanding general O'Donnell was flying his B-29s over there. They could fly up to a certain point. They could shoot at them, but they couldn't go get them. I've I've been very upset with defensive warfare. In my opinion, there's only one way to fight a war. You cream everything and come home. I mean, Vietnam, we got 50,000 guys killed. And that was the awfulest thing. And then the Americans treated Vietnam veterans like they were dogs or something a lot of times. This is terrible. This was really a blot on America, the Vietnam War. As I said, there's only one way to fight a war. LeMay had the idea. Boy. And
you didn't see that happening.
War's wrong.
You didn't see that happening in Korea at the time? That we were going all out to win?
I shouldn't say this, I guess, but I don't know what happened with MacArthur and Harry Truman. I won't make an opinion on this. But I have a feeling if they let MacArthur go, he would have straightened this out. We wouldn't have had that line. This is my opinion. These are my opinions. We wouldn't have had this line here. I think we'd have done a better job in Korea, cleaning that mess up. That's the reason I wouldn't have volunteered for Korea.
But you got out about the time Korea was getting hot.
I was 51.
Why did you decide to quit then?
Flying was getting to me. Getting personal now. Flying was getting to me. I got thousands of hours up there in the air flying. If I flew with a second lieutenant that wanted to do some acrobatics in a plane that wasn't stressed for acrobatics, I had to take it. Even though I was a major, if he's a second lieutenant, he's the airplane commander. And you don't squeal on a guy. You don't squeal on a guy and so forth. So I was getting, I went to Walter Reed Hospital. I was discharged out of Walter Reed. So that's my personal thing.
During the war, during World War II, did you see any shows, like U.S. shows, entertainers?
Oh my. On Saipan, Jackie Cooper was there. Movies every night. That was great. Yeah, Jackie Cooper and the, what they call him? I forget what they called his outfit, his band. They were great entertainers.
How about the food? Was there any place that had
the
excellent
food was powdered eggs, and we got fresh eggs once a week. Things like that. We laughingly accused the Navy of taking our beef to Australia and bringing us Australian goat. but it wasn't too bad. My hat was off. I admired the Marines so much. Those Marines, boy. My wife kids me and I say those poor suckers in those foxholes really deserve a lot. I was on Iwo Jima about 2 weeks after it was secured. I don't know why. I navigated a B-24 up there. I don't know why I was in wing headquarters. I navigated a B-24 up to Iwo. There were Marines walking around like zombies. They were shell-shocked. But one thing about the Air Corps, the Air Force, you flew missions, you got shot at, it was tough flying. But when you got back, you had a cot to sleep in, you had warm food, you didn't have sea rations and this kind of thing. So my hat's off to those Marines, boy. They were great people. And of course the Army. Willis Shoemaker's a good friend. Some of the things they went through was terrible.
Did you see any wounded or dead Marines when you were in the Pacific?
No.
Were there any pranks or fun and games at the base in the Pacific on Saipan?
No, we played volleyball. That's a lot of guys played a lot of poker, but outside of that,
Were you a big smoker or drinker back in the war?
no. I didn't drink overseas. I gave my beer to my tent mates. I smoked cigars. I couldn't smoke cigarettes. I never did. I smoked cigars, the pipe. But about 30 some years ago, I quit all that. But I know we had an officers club there. And fact is, after a mission, you could go in and have a little shot. Calmed me down, but I didn't. I was kind of amazed that they gave us benzodrine, navigators especially, because you had to stay awake. The crew could sleep all the way to Japan. If you got out of there all right, you could sleep back, but the navigator had to stay awake. And they gave us benzodrine. I'd wait till we get off of the runway, come off of that mush, get off the ground and get in the air before I'd take two, but then stay awake 2 days. But then, phew, boy, get down.
As a navigator on these missions, were you lead navigator at any time?
No.
I know I talked to other navigators in Europe, and they were just following each other.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing with the B-29?
When they flew formations, that's true. Had the navigator. In fact, the wing navigator, a fellow by the name of Reineck, is in Hawaii. I see his name in the navigation roster. Now, I'm trying to call him. I'd like to talk to him. He was my tent mate, Reineck. He flew missions in the 8th Air Force. And whenever 73rd Wing formed, he was a friend of General O'Donnell. They made him wing navigator. And that. But he was one of the lead navigators in Europe, B-17s.
When you used the radar in airplanes, were you looking for other airplanes also
Yeah,
with the radar?
yeah, you could. You pick up clouds. You could. That APQ-13, you could do that.
Were you operating any machine guns to shoot back also in that B-29?
We were supposed to, at Clovis, New Mexico, as I said, B-29 was an experimental aircraft. We'd get up 4 o'clock in the morning, and there would be 50 crews down there. There might be 2 airplanes operational. We sat around all day. We had a great time playing bridge, talking to the crew. It was a pretty chummy crew getting together and that. Then when we would get an airplane, the navigator was supposed to, and everybody's supposed to get some training on those guns out on the gunning range, out on the range. Well, we finally got one. We got out on the range, they jammed. Had to come back. Guns jammed, come back. Got out there again, they jammed. We lifted the cap off. See, this was inside remote control guns in the 29. We took the thing off, got the belts out, put them in the bomb bays, dropped them. Went back and said, well, we shot our So I never shot a gun. Never shot a gun in a plane.
When they were remote control, were you operating some type of stick?
Oh, inside. The B-29 was air air conditioned, or was
Pressurized.
yeah, and you lined up. There was a circle. Chaps would come in, and you get them in here, and at a certain point in that circle, the guns were computers. It was computers. It's much better than B-17. There was 50 calibers of the B-17. They had to fire those things. The poor guys over there in the 8th Air Force, sometimes they couldn't handle the guns, and they'd take their gloves off, and they frostbite on their fingers, and so forth. 29 was different. That's one thing. It was a beautiful airplane. It's a model over there. But
Have you ever been up in a B-29 since you got out of the military?
no. They put them mothballs. Last B-29 I was in, I guess, was the one we flew in Quadsland. I flew in 25s, I flew in B-17s, I flew in B-24, flew C-47s, C-130, flew in that one time.
As you look back over your military career, how did that affect your life, the military?
Well, I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. I was bitter when I went in because I had that scholarship at the University of Wisconsin.
For a master's type of degree?
Or to work on a master's degree in chemistry. I was bitter, but when Pearl Harbor broke, I was satisfied. Everybody was part of it. And the experience there, I've been living on borrowed time for a long time. I was telling them the other day, Christmas Day 1941, I was in a training mission from Albany, Georgia to Meridian, Mississippi. We got in a storm. I was flying the co-pilot seat as an instructor. I was still a cadet. Pilot was second lieutenant. I'll never forget him, Leffler. And we flying up and down the beam. They said, just one of your buddies has already landed, but he cleared himself for Birmingham. So we head for Birmingham, Alabama. Going up, I said, there's Tuscaloosa, green light. There's Tuscaloosa Air Base. Keeps on going. So we get to Birmingham, it's sucked in. So he's going back. He thinks he's going to Maxwell Field. I used the radio compass. I said, you're not going to Maxwell Field. You're going opposite. Sits there. So I just threw the maps down, fastened my safety belt. We're down to about 300 feet. So there was a field down there. He went on by. Pretty soon he turned around, went back. Our gas gauges were about empty. He dragged the field once, went around, and the engines quit. We wobbled every drop of gas out of their tanks. They quit. He hit the ground, bounced the thing. We were running over the field, hit a ditch. There was a fence post there. They hit the nose of that, brought the tail back down. If we'd have gone, probably been one big explosion. That was Christmas Day, 1941. He got out at a farmhouse, called, well, we're a few miles above Meridian. So they sent some enlisted men. I bet those enlisted men could have killed us. Up from Meridian to guard the airplane. They took us down there and put us in a cot. Next morning, it took us back up there and filled the plane up with gas, pulled it out of the ditch. We fly back home.
So you were lucky.
Yeah, but that's one time. Another time, I was with a pilot, got a wild hair. We had an airspeed calibration on a railroad track. Calibrate the airspeed. So I'm flying co-pilot. Went in the briefing room and the pilot said, what are we flying today, Bucky? I said, airspeed. Oh boy. It was the only legal low level mission that we had. So he gets out on the runway, pushes the throttle, he goes up over trees, down. We start chasing cows in a field. I bet those cows didn't give milk for a month. We got out on the railroad track. We started 130 and then 140, 150 up and down the track. At the end of that track, there were some high tension wires. If we'd have got by that last run, he would have gone under, I have a feeling. But he kept getting lower. I was waving to the cars on the road. They were, at the last run at 180, we were going down through there. He hit one of these railroad semaphore flags with the wing. Yeah, we hit it. Boy, that scared him. He pulled up and we went in the field and landed. He had to land with power on because it was going to bubble out. Pulled up to operations. He went in and says, there was a gash in that wing. And that aileron over there, it's high. How it still worked, I don't know, because you couldn't have put a hair in there. If it had pinched off, we'd have just gone like that. Boom. But he told him in operation, I was going down this railroad track, and they lifted the signal on me.
Oh.
And I hit it. In those days, it was wild. Everybody, the war was on. He got away with it.
I'd like to thank you for your interview today. Is there anything else you'd like to add tonight?
I can remember things happened 50 years ago better than what happened last week. I'm 87.
There is one other question I'd like to ask. My son is a Boy Scout. Were you a Boy Scout?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience at Boy Scouts?
Well, it was off and on. In Davis, they started the Boy Scouts. I got to be a first-class scout. But these guys, we had our hikes, and we went camping. All right. And the Presbyterian Church had a rec room, and we did a lot of activity in that room, tumbling and basketball and things. But I didn't get any merit badges. And then it folded up because the interest was bad. And then when I came back home, when I retired from the Air Force, came back home, they had a scout troop. And I volunteered. I was assistant scoutmaster for a while. Helped these kids. And there have been kids that needed merit badges like astronomy. I could help them with that. Or since I was science, had science, I could help with that. But it's a good organization.
Yeah, we were talking about that. And I've asked a few other vets too. They seem to take that as the beginning step.
Oh, yeah. You know, in my opinion today, if they would have the CCC camps like they had back during the Depression and take these kids off the street and put them in the camps, They paid them, not much, but I know one fellow supported his mother and sister, CCC camps. And they did an awful lot of good in the forest, cleaning up the forest, building dams, and things like that. I think it'd be a big asset to this country. I think.
Well, thank you, Mr. Walters.